Let's take a look at this problem where we contrast activity-based costing with conventional product cost. It's problem 3-15A that you see on the screen in front of you. Now I know it isn't the clearest picture I have, so let's read some of it. Puget World manufactures two models of television sets, the N800XL and the N500. And you can see in the table data to the left that it takes the annual production is 3,000 units for the model N800 XL and 12,000 units for the N500. Direct labor hours per unit are 3 for the N800 XL and 1 direct labor hour per unit for the N500. And the total direct labor hours are 9,000, 12,000 for a total of 21,000. Okay, then they provide some other information that you can read to the left, and let me help you read that for you. Model N800XL requires $75 in direct materials per unit, and model N500 requires $25. The direct labor wage rate is $18 per hour. The company has always used direct labor hours as the base for applying manufacturing overhead cost to products. And then note D says, Model N800XL is more complex to manufacture than the Model N500, and it requires the use of special equipment. Consequently, the company is considering the use of activity-based costing to apply manufacturing overhead cost to products. And they developed 3 activity cost pools that we see below. So let me slide that a little bit so we can see a little bit more of that. Okay, so they have machine setups, special processing, and general factory, and I'm reading this left to the mouse there. And then they indicate the activity measures. So machine setups is the number of setups. The estimated cost is $360,000 in that cost pool. Special processing uses the measure of machine hours, and they're estimating $165,000. And then general factory uses direct labor hours, where they're expecting to have an estimated cost in overhead of $1,260,000. Okay, then the expected activities also appear below for the Model N, the 500, the Model N800XL, the Model 500 in total. So you can read all of that, and I think that's fairly legible, so I won't read that. Let's take a look at that first requirement. Assume that the company continues to use direct labor hours as the base for applying overhead cost. Compute the predetermined overhead rate. So let's do 1A, and we'll do that on the next sheet where we can have a little room to write. Okay, so again, if we're going to calculate a predetermined, this is number 1, let me type in, okay, predetermined overhead rate, and I'm going to abbreviate, is going to be equal to the total manufacturing overhead, right? This is the traditional way now. We're not considering the products differently. We're treating them the same. Divided by total, I'm going to abbreviate, total direct labor hours. Okay, so going back here then, we need to know what is the total manufacturing overhead and what's the total direct labor hours. Well, the total manufacturing overhead is right there to my left, $1,785,000, and the total direct labor hours is 21,000. So if we drop that in, we get 1,785 divided by 21,000, and what we come up with is, let me see if I can, is $85, and that's per direct labor hour. Okay, and I'll bold that. That's the answer to 1A. All right, let's take a look at 1B. 1B says compute the unit product cost of each model. Alright, so what we need to do here is break them down. There was a Model N800XL, and let me just copy this over here, and there was a Model N500 with no XL. Okay, let's underline that, and then we need to break it down to the various components, right? So we're going to need to identify what were the material costs. We're going to need to identify the direct labor costs, and then we'll need to identify the manufacturing overhead, and I'm abbreviating again, costs. Okay, so the direct material, let's see if we can find that information. $75 and $25, and direct labor is 18 per hour, with 3 direct hours per unit and 1 direct hours per unit. So The direct materials was $75 per unit. Model N was 25, and then the direct labor was 3 times 18 for the Model X, right? Took 3 hours times $18 per hour. So that comes out to be $54. And the Model N used $18 an hour again, but only 1 hour. So we'll make that equal to 1 hour times 18. Okay. And using the traditional way, if we're going to apply overhead based on what we calculated above, which was $85, we would then take $85 per direct labor hour. So we'll grab that $85 there times 3 hours for Model N XL, since it took 3 hours to make, and take the 85 just times 1 hour, since it only took 1 hour to make the Model N 500, right? Probably I should justify these so it'll look a little nicer. And from there we can calculate the unit product cost of each model. So we'll just underline this and sum it. And that's the correct answer in dollars. Maybe we'll put a currency sign. Now I'm going the wrong way. Oop, I'm going the wrong way again. Let me slide this over again. We don't need that to be that big. Does that look about right? Yeah, looks pretty good. So 384 and 128. Now I don't want any cents. So 384 and 128. That should be just perfect for part 1B. So I'll label that 1B. Now let's take a look at part 2. Slide on down here. Part 2 said, assume that the company decides to use activity-based costing to apply manufacturing overhead costs. Okay, well if they do that, then we need to compute the predetermined overhead for each activity cost pool and determine the overhead cost that would be applied to each model. Alright, so what we've got to do now is break out those pieces. So 2A, we need to first determine, let me just put it about here, the various cost pools were machine setup, right? Special processing and general factory. And then the first thing we need to do is calculate the estimated overhead costs. And then we need to calculate the expected activity. And we can then, and once we have that, we can divide the first one by the second one to come up with an activity rate. Okay, so the machine setups, now we need the estimate cost here. It was 360, 165, and 1260. That's to the left of my mouse. So let me just jot those down. Okay, and then going back to get the data on the expected activity, it was 316.5 and 21,000. See how I use the total of the expected activity? And that comes out to be 316.5 and 21,000. Okay, so then if we divide out the activity rates, we take that dollar amount by that activity, and we come up with an activity rate, an activity rate, an activity rate, and these are all in dollars now. And the 1,200 would be per setup. The $10 is per machine hour. I'm abbreviating here. And the $60 rate is per direct labor hour, because it's based on what's the measure of the driver that's being used to develop, to do an allocation between the various products. Okay, so that takes care of 2A. Now 2B says, let's go read 2B again. 2B says compute the unit product cost of each model. So here what we've got to do is we'll drop these titles again, and then we've got to calculate the various components, and those components are right here. So we drop in machine, specialty, and general factory. And we got to go get the information. Now, Model N used 100 number of setups. The 800 XL used 100. The 500 used 200 units. Model N 500. So machine setups then, which is equal to the $1,200 rate for Model N 800 XL, is times 100 units. And we take that same activity rate times 200 units, which relate to the Model N 500. Okay? For specialty processing, we've got, 16.5 and 0. So we take the 16.5, or let's take the $10 first. So equal the $10 per machine hour times 16,500 machine hours. This one used nothing. We don't have any item to put in there. Then general factory, it was 9,000 and 12,000. So we take the 9,000, let me take it, the $60 general factory per direct labor times 9,000 hours. Direct labor hours is for 540. This one will use that $60 direct labor hour, and they were expecting 12,000 direct labor hours. Okay, and that 12,000 came from right there. There's the 9 and the 12 to the left of my mouse. Okay, so once we have that, we can assemble the total costs, total product costs, if you will. We'll just sum these down. Okay, and then we can calculate the estimated number of units produced. And let's go figure out where we got that information from. 3,000 and 12,000, right from there. 3,000 and 12,000 annual production. So we jot those numbers down. And from there we can calculate the overhead cost per unit using ABC by just taking that 825,000 costs divided by the 3,000 units. And I just add a couple dollars in here. Those are units, so now we can format those, and we get the answer to 2B. Again, I'll bold those. 2A, the answers we needed really were these ones here. Okay, 275 and 80 is correct. Okay, now I've slid the screen a little bit. That gives us our overhead costs, but we still need to calculate the other components to come up with the total unit cost. So I'll add in direct materials. And this should look very similar to what we had before, 75 and 25 from above, right? So actually, why don't I take the 75 and the direct labor, just copy all of that down. Yep, the 75, 25, and the 54 and 18 is exactly the same, right? It's the same 3 hours times 18, or 1 hour times $18 an hour. And then we would add in the manufacturing overhead from what we had above. I'll just copy it again. Okay, so we copy from there, and I'm going to come up with the unit product cost. I'm just going to copy from here because that formula will sum those. So we come up with 404 and 123, and that is the answer to 2B. Okay, let's take a look at number 3 now. 3 said, explain why manufacturing overhead cost shifts from Model N 500 to Model N X100 XL under activity-based costing. Okay, well, I'm not actually going to write the answer down, but I'll talk you through it here. Okay, so with activity-based costing, what we came up with was a large proportion of the company's overhead cost continued to be applied based on direct labor hours, and that was the general factory, right? So 1,260,000 was still applied based on direct labor hours. But we did get some differences in machine setups and specialty processing because how those are used between the two products is not an even spread. It's the activities that drive them are different between the two products. So we get a shift in overhead costs from high volume products um, in the high volume product model N500 to the low volume product model N800XL occurred because we reassigned approximately 30%. It'd be the machine setup cost and the specialty factoring cost, and combined that's a little under 30% of the company's overhead cost. So the increase in unit cost of the Model N800XL can be explained as the result of overhead costs have been traced to products rather than being lumped together and spread uniformly. Special processing costs, which are all due to processing the Model N800XL, were assigned specifically to Model N800XL, and none were assigned to Model N500, so there we get a difference. Then the cost associated with batch level activities, and this was machine setups, were assigned on the basis of setups rather than direct labor hours, and that change, regardless of the batch side assigned this, let me sort of say that change resulted in differences between how the items were costed. Okay, so what happens is the smaller the batch, the higher the unit cost, and we were able to see that difference as well in how we costed the products. So the average setup cost wound up to be 2 times as great for Model N800 as for Model N500, and differences like these, you really can't find them when we use a single approach to spreading all costs like direct labor hours. But when we break it down into appropriate activities that are driving those costs, we get a more accurate costing approach. Okay, so now I didn't exactly type that out, but that's sort of a verbal way we would address number 3. Okay, so we've explained the differences, we've looked at all the details, we've prepared a schedule of the current way and under the activity costing way above, and I hope you found that beneficial. Thanks, everyone.